Welcome back for even more of your favorite Atari 2600 games. Many of them are great arcade games in the video today, so let's get your quarters ready and let's get started. Number 1, Pitfall 2. What can be better than Pitfall? Only its sequel, of course. One of the best things that I love about Pitfall 2 is the box art. I love the minimalist style of the cover art. It reminds me of Return to Zork. Pitfall 2 has a much more robust map instead of the ground level and the cavern beneath it, as you can see here on the map. Some added features in Pitfall 2 is that you can swim in the water, guide your fall to the left or right, and even float through the air on a balloon. Another thing that was introduced in Pitfall 2 over its predecessor was a checkpoint system. Instead of starting at the same screen you died on and lose a life, you just go back to the checkpoint. There is also a point system instead of a timer or lives, so you can just keep playing from the last checkpoint, which will cost you your points to go back. But since there are no lives or timer involved, you can play as long as you want, even if you have no points left. There was also a Pitfall 2 arcade game with many elements from the original Pitfall and Pitfall 2, and it was a wonder of its own. And to everyone out there that suggested Pitfall 2, I give great thanks to, as it was an awesome game to play. Number 2, Millipede. Here's another great arcade classic released onto the 2600. This version really captures the arcade gameplay and it plays very well for an Atari 2600 game. In the side-by-side comparison, even though you can see the arcade had better graphics, it really shows that this home version was definitely worth having in your collection. Number 3, Donkey Kong. Oh, the quarters I spent on this one. Donkey Kong was my uncle's favorite arcade game, and he still holds the high score in my arcade at my house. The Atari 2600's port of Donkey Kong doesn't have the polish of the ColecoVision's port, but it still has pretty good gameplay, but I believe it only has 2 levels to the game. Although I played this on my Atari as a kid, playing this now, I noticed that the fireballs did not go up and down the ladder, so it has pretty much made the hammer useless but for the level it's on. So despite its flaws, it's still a pretty good game by Atari standards. Number 4, Space Invaders. Now on to some more arcade goodness. Atari's Space Invaders does not disappoint on its gameplay. Minus the arcade's Pepper's Ghost effect, its animated invaders to its iconic panic-inducing game music, this port channels the arcade spirit with ease. The side-by-side shows how well the Atari's version really holds up to the arcade game. I can see why this was so beloved by many of the commenters. Number 5, Dig Dug. Yet another iconic arcade classic. Dig Dug on the Atari really brings home the bacon. This port does a great job of mimicking the arcade's gameplay and music and sound effects and the aesthetics, as you can see here in the side-by-side comparison. I have no doubt that the Atari Dig Dug is probably one of the best arcade adaptations made for the Atari 2600, and that's why it is on many people's top 10. Number 6, Astroblast. Although Astroblast is not an arcade game, it does take elements from other arcades. I see it as a little bit of a combination of Missile Command, Asteroids, and Space Invaders. Using your laser base, you take out the rocks pummeling towards you and the other objects that show up as well. When you hit a large rock, it splits into smaller rocks, much like Asteroids. An interesting feature of the game is you could either use the controller or the paddle to play the game. I tried the controller first, then I switched over to the paddle. Needless to say, I will need a lot more practice using the paddle, as I got smoked pretty quickly compared to using the controller. Astroblast was a good game to hone your shooting skills. Number 7, Crackpots. Although Crackpots is not an arcade game as well, it does have many arcade game qualities. Made by Activision, you take out the bugs trying to infest your building by hitting them on the head with a flower pot. Now that's some big bugs. Once the bugs have gobbled up 6 layers of your building, the game is over. The game does have a similar feel as Kaboom, which is also from Activision. I tried to see if the paddles would work for this game, but they did not. Thank you to all that suggested this game, as it was a blast to play. Okay, number 8, Asteroids. Asteroids in all of its vector splendor. Many a time I played this arcade at the hotels we would stay at, and the burn-in on the monitor always mesmerized me. The Atari 2600 version of Asteroids, although not a vector game, really kept the charm and the embodiment of the arcade version. With its own set of different colored asteroids and new sound effects, it really added to the visuals of the Atari game. My brother and I would see how long and fast we could go once we only had a handful of small asteroids to deal with. It was a lot of fun until you smashed into one. Number 9, Carnival. Carnival is a personal favorite of mine, but alas, I played it on the ColecoVision instead of the Atari. Based on the arcade of the same name, it's a classic shooting gallery, and although the Atari port is missing the bonus and the bear shooting gallery, it is still a pretty fun game to play. One thing that I do miss on the Atari port is that in the arcade you had the ability to shoot out the music box to turn the music on or off. The game is pretty challenging and keeps your shooting skill up to par. I highly recommend this game if you haven't taken a crack at it before. And now, number 10, Tapper. From the adult version with Budweiser to the more kid-friendly root beer Tapper and a few other iterations, Tapper is a pretty fun and unique game. The Atari 2600 port captures the spirit of the arcade game perfectly, as you can see here in the side-by-side comparison. Tapper was a challenging game to play as you had to manage your crowds and refills, but it never became a dull game for me. Tapper is also the earliest game I can remember that had in-game advertisements, and there were several depending on the version or system that it was being played on as depicted here. Tapper also had one of my favorite bonus games where the bandit shook up the cans and made them dance, and you had to figure out which one wouldn't spray you in the face. Good call out there to everyone's favorite Atari 2600 games. I enjoyed every one of them. If you've enjoyed all these Atari 2600 game reviews, I've done several others that you can check out here right on this channel, along with a bunch of other door games and arcades and stuff like that. I look forward to reviewing more, so stay tuned here for the next video, but until then, Digital Infinity out.